Meanwhile, both presumptive presidential nominees are back on the campaign trail today. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump will hold events in New York and Virginia, respectively. We'll soon see how the pair handles the deaths that have taken place in Dallas, Baton Rouge, and suburban St. Paul. John Dickerson joins us. John, you are the moderator of Face the Nation and CBS News political director. You had a lot to talk about this Sunday on Face the Nation. It's been quite a week, and the conversation continues into this week. Let's talk about these presumptive nominees and how crucial it is that they handle what has become an incredibly sensitive conversation. The nation is, I think, emotionally out of breath. How crucial is it that they figure out how to handle this well?
There's so much to pull apart here. So there's the facts of the case, getting it straight, understanding that we don't want to paint with too broad a brush, either when talking about the police or when talking about African Americans. That's the first set of challenges, dealing with this. But then there's also just the way we talk about these things in general. Everybody in politics recently has gotten rid of all restraint and just rush in with hot takes and with existing kind of pre-written scripts, and that just leads to the same old fights, no new learning. So where do leaders fit in with this? It is a moment where we look to our presidents or our leaders for some sense of control. Maybe not a 5-point plan necessarily on how to solve this. Some of these problems are only going to be touched at with a 5-point plan. They take place over a long period of time. But we have developed a kind of response in America to look to our leaders for some sense of comfort and control. And both of these, both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are trying out for that role. And so how are they going to perform? I think one of the things to go back and look at is when Bobby Kennedy was campaigning and responded to Martin Luther King's death. It was a moment where you saw that here was a person who had dealt with death and tragedy in their lives, who had a system for dealing with that. And when people turned to him, his speech gave them some framework to think about chaotic events. Now, that's not written in the Constitution, but it's what we do when we look at leaders. Yeah, I thought about the challenge of sort of displaying your ability to be the comforter in chief while still being in battle mode. They're still competing against each other. They're still trying to show up the other one as less ready for the role, and also trying to set their own agendas, set their own talking points. But as has happened during the campaign, the country often forces their next talking point upon them. I'm wondering if you think that this is going to impact them in November. Is this the kind of thing that will stick around? I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously a huge issue in the country. It's going to affect us whether, as you point out, whether the candidates want it to or not. To the extent it's not in the headlines, then they will have some in November. Then whatever is in the headlines is in the headlines, and they'll be evaluated against that. I think more broadly, as the two of them respond to this question, though, over the course of the next, until election time, there's an opportunity for mistakes. But I mean, there's an upside too. In other words, to give people that sense of control over this issue, or give people a feeling that if they elect this person, there's some progress that can be made. That's the upside. The downside, though, is putting a foot wrong. And on an issue like this, that's very possible to do because tensions and emotions are so high. Yeah, definitely. Let's talk about former Mayor Rudy Giuliani on your show on Face the Nation. He's a guy who has some very strong opinions about the Black Lives Matter movement, strong opinions about the African American community and policing and the killing of African American men at the hands of police. And he didn't shy away from controversy on your show. Can we listen to at least a little bit of that?
When you say Black Lives Matter, that's inherently racist. Well, I think their Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, Asian Lives Matter, Hispanic Lives Matter. That's anti-American and it's racist. Of course Black Lives matter, and they matter greatly. But when you focus in on 1% of less than 1% of the murder that's going on in America, and you make it a national thing, and all of you in the media make it much bigger than the black kid who's getting killed in Chicago every 14 hours, you create a disproportion. The police understand it, and it puts a target on their back. Every cop in America will tell you that if you ask them.
So what did you make of his interview with you? I mean, he also said some other things, essentially that, you know, if black parents care about their children, they'll tell them that they're more likely to be killed by another black person than the police, and they should, you know, not fear the police. What did you make out of that?
Well, he's trying to bring balance to a conversation he thinks gotten out of whack. Yes, that's why he was talking about the proportionality of the coverage. And so what he's trying to say is, wait, let's swing the pendulum back. Let's not define all police by the very bad actors. The problem is that in this conversation, when you say when you talk about Black Lives Matter as he did, first of all, what's he talking about with Black Lives Matter? There is the official Black Lives Matter, and then there is Black Lives Matter as the term that gets applied to all social justice movements that have taken place. Yeah, and so in Dallas, for example, the protest in Dallas that was interrupted by the sniper was not a Black Lives Matter movement, though it's been called that. Yes. So that's one, getting our terms straight here is important. And I think in terms of what he was saying, he seemed to be suggesting, and it was hard to know because I couldn't ask him in the follow-up, but he seemed to be suggesting that Black Lives Matter means Black Lives Matter more. The argument that the Black Lives Matter movement would make is, no, it means Black Lives Matter just as much. Right. And that they, and I think what a lot of the people I've talked to have been saying on both sides of this is that there is and Newt Gingrich spoke to this eloquently when he basically said in this conversation, there must be an appreciation for the other side's views. And Newt Gingrich, speaking as a white person, said, you know, whites need to understand that in the African American community, there is this sense of being under threat, and that we as whites underestimate that threat. If you look at it from the Gingrich perspective, then the Black Lives Matter movement, while Newt Gingrich, I'm sure, is no fan of the Black Lives Matter movement, if you look at it from his perspective, you take the meaning in its intended fashion, and then have the conversation there from that point of view.
Yeah. It was a very good interview. It was a very interesting interview. Let's talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice. She said some things that I was actually quite surprised. I don't know if I've heard a sitting Supreme Court Justice be this frank. She was talking about Donald Trump, and she said, quote, "I can't imagine what this place would be. I can't imagine what the country would be with Donald Trump as our president." Are these words going to come back to haunt her in the future? I mean,
it won't haunt her in the sense that it won't get her knocked out of her job.
No,
but yeah, you know, usually the judicial branch of government stays out of the executive branch in terms of its electoral process. She's a bit of a hero in the liberal movement, so to that extent, I'm sure it'll remind everybody on the left that, you know, there's real things at stake here in this election, and that even if people have issues with Hillary Clinton, doesn't matter. It's about the court. Now, that may work on the left. It also works on the right. And people on the right say, you know, whatever we may feel about Donald Trump, and I hear this all the time, it really comes down to the court, because the court makes decisions for 30, 40, 50 years. Hillary Clinton may be in office, you know, for 8 years, but she can only do so much damage as the right would see it. But a court, and in this case, a court where the majority could flip, depending on the number of people that the next president gets to nominate. So it was certainly historic in a sense, in that usually that's not what justices do, or at least in the modern era.
Definitely true. John Dickerson, thank you so much.
Sure thing.